Hello everybody, this is the lesson on consolidating by the Constitution. What I'm going to try and do in this session is go through the techniques you should use by looking at what's on the specification and thinking about what reading is going to be suitable for you, what potential questions could be asked, and then looking at 10 potential preparation for 9 marks and 25 mark extract questions. Okay, so it's about the Constitution. And if you look at the definitions of the Constitution, there are things that you need to be aware of. The questions will always be around whether you're thinking about the principles, you're thinking about the rights that are provided, and you see how effectively these come together in making the Constitution work. Be aware of the definition, because the definition allows you as a starting point to break the question down. Okay, as you can see here, the specification shows this. Because it talks, as you see in the purple there, about the principles and the framework. It talks about the federal structure, and you have to understand this. It talks about the amendment process and how it can be changed, whether or not that works or it doesn't work. The bit in red is red because I don't want you to worry too much about rights as a 25 mark question yet. It was so much clearer when we do the Supreme Court later on in the year. So don't worry about that too much now. I gave you this before. It outlines the reading that you can do, chunks it into sections, gives you an indication of some of the articles that can support that reading, and also on the right hand side it shows you some of the questions. Now this assessment we're going to do after half term is not with a comparative question, so you don't need to worry about questions 5 to 7. Questions 1 to 4 are all valid in terms of what they can give you in terms of 9 mark questions, but they also will allow us to consider the extract question as well. Now, this is an adaptation of Mr. Brown's slide in terms of extract questions, and a few points I just want you to raise with you here. If you look at point 1, I think the likelihood is that the extracts that you get will be balanced. In that situation, you need to think about how the author stresses the points that are made, either points in favour or points against. They may use particular language with this, and that's something you can pick up on. Also, if you look at point 4, it talks there about analysing and evaluating each of the points and using specific and detailed examples from your own knowledge. I think that's absolutely crucial. So when we consider the arguments for and against a particular aspect of the Constitution, that's what you want to be considering. How could you develop points more effectively, bring your own knowledge to it? In the end, it talks about writing a conclusion, and you should use the normal method that we use there by making a clear judgment, acknowledging the arguments that challenge your judgment, but also prioritising the reasons why you made the judgment in the first place. Okay, so if we look at a particular issue about the Constitution, such as how well does the US Constitution support democracy, you need to have arguments for and against this. As you can see here, we have arguments favour and arguments against. If we look at the arguments in favour, you can see that I've raised the issue about the amendment process, allowing a growth in the franchise over time. What you'd need to be able to do is be able to illustrate that by giving examples of how different groups have gained the vote over the 250 years that the Constitution has been in place. Secondly, we talk about the electoral cycle. That's you, again, explaining the way in which the Congress is elected, the 2-year cycle for the House of Representatives and the 6-year cycle for the Senate, but also the fact that it's elected in thirds. You can then compare to the UK and the nature of the House of Lords, but also the way in which there's a fixed term Parliament Act now in place. Third point talks about minority rights being protected in the Bill of Rights. Good examples that are available there will help to illustrate this particular point. The main thrust, though, is being the idea that we don't have a tyranny of majority in the United States, and that's an essential part of democracy. On the no side, well, you need to know about the Electoral College, because that's one of the main concerns about democracy. If you're not sure, and you got your textbook, page 273 is very good in terms of outlining what that's about. The essential point is that, as we've seen both with the Al Gore election in 2000 and also in 2016, you can win more votes than your opponent but still lose the election, and you've got to be able to explain that. Second point is really taking on the challenge of saying that Congress is responsive by suggesting that it isn't necessarily responsive to constituents, but more responsive to interest groups because of their influence over funding and the creation of iron triangles within Congress. The third threat to democracy, I guess, is to say that actually there's too much power given to smaller states and minority groups in the United States, stopping national priorities being moved forward. So you could look at the amendment process and you can discuss the fact that that actually allows a minority of states to stop progress that way. So as you can see there's arguments for and against in regards to the support of democracy, but I would certainly be looking at the Tuck article to help you with this. The second area of consideration is maybe thinking about how the amendment process works. Now, if you look in terms of what's the benefits of the amendment process in America, you can talk about the need for a wider consensus or agreement for change than you have perhaps found in the UK. To do an explanation of this, you really need to know about the technical details, such as the requirements of 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states to pass these amendments. Other arguments in favour of the amendment process is how smaller states are protected from radical change, and secondly, how the danger of temporary issue can avoid short-term changes. You know, what you would do there is you'd want to talk perhaps about the comparison of the Brexit vote in compared to the various amendments that have been attempted in the United States. On the no side, you're saying the amendment process has difficulties. For example, you can talk about how the Constitution remains outdated because of difficulties in removing the Electoral College or changing the Electoral College, or the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms. You could then say how, in fact, smaller states are unresponsive to the national need, and that's similar to the point in the other argument. And then finally, the emphasis placed on the Supreme Court, an unelected body to interpret the Constitution and to keep it alive, because the amendment process is too complicated, too cumbersome, and can't change things when it needed to. So actually the Supreme Court plays a key role in keeping the Constitution legitimate as such. Now, I've used these slides before with you, and if you use these in conjunction with your textbook around page 22 to 27, I should get some good information in regards to the benefits and constraints of the amendment process. Okay, third potential question would be looking at how the federal structure works. Arguments in favour of the federal structure are the ways in which states who came together originally to make the United States of America still have their sovereignty protected. You want to be able to explain about the 10th Amendment here, but also give examples of how the Supreme Court has supported this. The other two arguments in favour of the federal structure is the capacity for federal government to get involved when needed. You could give examples of the New Deal or Great Society legislation here, how cooperative and creative federalism has emerged over time. The third point is talking about innovative strategies for change that states can bring forward, almost like pilot schemes across America. And there's some good examples of that within the articles I've given you. On the no side, the three arguments against it are really talking about how there's been a consideration by groups such as the 10th Amendment that the federal government has become too powerful. Why? Because the Commerce Clause has been exploited and national security concerns have been exploited to allow federal government to get its tentacles, if you like, into different states. Second point is similar to this, but you're talking about how the federal government can now use financial pressure in the form of coercive federalism to actually impose change upon the states, bully them into making changes that perhaps they wouldn't be against. The final point is different to this. It's almost saying that in fact federal government can't work effectively because of the federal structure that's in place. There's too many different states implementing policy in different ways, and as a result of which it means that policy is incohesive. You can give the example of Obamacare in this situation. To help you with this, I would review this particular article about big government being inevitable in the United States, too powerful, and look at the arguments there if you're not sure. Finally, the question could be, how well does the system of checks and balances work in the United States Constitution? The arguments in favour of this, you're looking at effective restraints on executive actions, all those different ways in which Congress or the Supreme Court can restrict, such as the appointment process, the declaration of war, the passing of foreign treaties. Another benefit is the demand of a bipartisan approach in Congress, seeking that broader consensus over legislation and budget decisions, which means that an executive cannot drive change through Congress, but actually has to seek a wider consensus which suits the whole nation. Finally, you can talk about the role of the Supreme Court in protecting minority rights, and give examples there of how the Supreme Court has challenged both the executive and Congress in its actions to ensure that rights are protected. On the no side, you're looking at the constraints and the difficulties that the checks and balances bring, such as in the first case, the idea of gridlock in the legislative process, the difficulties of actually getting different interests, where you could find that, as we have at this present time, the House of Representatives is Democrat controlled, the Senate is Republican controlled, and we have a Republican president, and as a result of which many issues such as the present stimulus package is finding difficult to get through. That point could be shown also in the second one, which talks about distrust and division and apathy that could be created because policy can't be brought through Congress effectively. You end up making political deals because of the iron triangles that exist, and compromise is essential. So all the promises of what Obamacare could have been were actually shaved down because of the needs of actually trying to get it through Congress and getting the deal done. Thirdly, you can make the point that actually the system is not suited to a partisan Congress. It's all very well having the theory that separation of powers and checks and balances work because it requires a consensus. But when you have a highly polarized Congress, that means it's very difficult to get things through, and it can actually politicize some significant decisions that have to be made. The difficulties that have been found with Supreme Court justice appointments are good examples of this, as they take away the need to find the best justice into a very political situation, as we've seen with the present nomination of Barrett. To help you with this, these two slides might be helpful because they give you not only the outline of the different checks and balances that exist, but also if you want to read some more articles about different places where these checks and balances have caused difficulties or have been beneficial, you can have a look at these. Okay, there's 4 different areas there, and those 4 different areas will provide not only help, I think, in preparation for the 25-mark question, but on either side they provide means by which you can explain and analyse different arguments in favour or against the Constitution. I hope you find that's helpful. If you have any questions, don't be shy and email me. Thanks.